In this video, we're going to go ahead and set up a Universal Distributed Logical Router, or UDLR, in our NSX environment so that we can allow VMs sitting on one Universal Logical Switch to be able to communicate with other VMs on a different Universal Logical Switch. And this will allow us to do Universal Logical Switch communication. The first thing we're going to have to go through and do is actually deploy the UDLR. So here on my NSX edges, you'll notice that from the drop down I have the option of doing it from either one, but you'll notice that on the secondary we can't just deploy a UDLR. We can only do that from the primary, so just be aware of that. I'm going to go to Add Universal Distributed Logical Router, universal meaning that it'll ride across both vCenter instances. I'm going to go ahead and call this UDLR1. And the host name is going to be the same, UDLR1. I am going to set up local egress. Local egress essentially means that in the event that I've got VMs sitting in Data Center 1, I want to make sure that they leave out any of the connectivity that's set up in Data Center 1. And if I've got VMs sitting in Data Center 2, I want them to leave out Data Center 2. Assuming that Data Center 1 and Data Center 2 are not close to each other. They're geographically distant. Now, in the event that you have DC1 and DC2 are in the same building, potentially, which is possible, or they're on the same campus but in two different buildings, whatever the type of scenario you're running into, you need to make sure that local egress is turned on at the time of deployment, because you can't go turn this on afterwards. So we're going to go through this deployment. I'm going to go ahead and click on next. We're going to go ahead and give it a password. And I'm going to turn on SSH for this. I'm going to go ahead and click on next. The deployment is, I'm going to go ahead and deploy it to, we're going to put it in DC1. We're going to add the Edge appliance. I'm going to put it on the DC1 management cluster in the host 4 data store and in the host 4 and on host 4, excuse me. I'm going to click on add, and then for the management HA interface, I'm going to put this guy on the distributed port group of management. Click on OK, and then click next. Interfaces. This is where I'm going to associate the universal logical switches that I created in the previous video. I'm going to call this guy right here. The first one will be ULS 1. This will be an internal connection, and I'm going to go ahead and associate ULS 1. So it's very, very easy to correlate. I'm going to set the IP address here. This guy will be 172.29.100.1/24. I'm going to go click on OK, and then I'm going to add one more. This guy will be ULS 2 internal. Connect this to ULS 2, Universal Logical Switch 2. Click on OK. Add the IP address. This guy will be 172.29.101.1/24. Click on OK. So very similar to any other regular DLR you've created in the past. And click on next. I am going to bypass the default gateway at this point in time. I'll talk about that later. Click on next and then review the config. It's going to go ahead and push out a UDLR. If I come over here to hosting clusters, the UDLR, that edge will get deployed right here on host 4. This will take some time to get propagated, as you obviously can tell. We have some room to work with on, we go over here to the summary tab of host 4. Host 4 has got plenty of room to deploy, so I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to pause the video while this is being deployed. Once it's deployed and once it's online, we will do some additional configuration with it. So we'll do some ping tests with our VMs and all that good stuff. And then my goal is, once that's tested and we make sure that we can ping between our universal logical switches, I will go through and set up connectivity to the outside world. Alright, now that our UDLR has been deployed, our next goal would be to jump over to hosting clusters. And we're going to take a look at LVM1. LBM1 is currently sitting on logical switch 10,000, and we are going to look at DC2 LBM1 is sitting on, give that a second to pull up. I believe that he's sitting on the same one. So I want to actually change this to be LBM2, and it's going to be 10,001. So essentially what we're going to be doing from a forwarding perspective is we're going to be in DC1 and then with LBM1 we're going to be joined to the logical switch here of 10,000, and then the DLR sitting over here. This is our UDLR, and then we're also going to have 10,001, and then over in we're going to have him connected like to this, and then we're going to have DC2. We're going to have DC2-LBM2. These guys will be connected to their appropriate logical switches. And then we've got dot 1 here and dot 1 here, which means we're going to send traffic to this guy this way. That traffic will be forwarded this direction and then sent down to here, and vice versa. Like that. So that's essentially what we're trying to do right now. So let's go ahead and pull up some of the connections here. It might take it a second for this to respond. We're going to pull up DC2-LBM2, and now things are running a little bit slow. Give that a couple seconds to respond. Alright, so we're going to move him to the right because he's over in the data center, and we're going to pull up LBM1. And we're going to pull up LBM1. So one will be on one side, one will be on the other. I'm going to go ahead and log into LBM1. I'm going to log into LBM2, but over on the other data center. And if I come over here and I do a ifconfig, I'm going to see that I'm 172.29.100, and if I hit the up arrow, I am 172.29.101. So I'm on both of my logical switches. From here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ping 172.29.100.11, and I can ping it, which is exactly what I want to do. I want to be able to ping my gateway as I am sending traffic to wherever I've got to go. Now this is a cool thing because now we are spanning the entire length of our data center. So we've got VXLAN traffic allowing this communication to happen, and everybody's happy. Now let's take this to the next level. What I'm going to go do is I'm going to clear off my screen. I'm going to go ahead and minimize these guys real quick. And I'm going to jump back over here to networking and security. And I'm going to choose the NSX edges. Our next major feat will be to set up communication so that we can have access to the outside network. How we're going to do this is we're going to set it up something like this. I'm going to have, this will be DC1 over here. This will be DC2 over here. What I have essentially is I have my CSR sitting between the guys. I'm going to have an Edge Services Gateway. I have my ESG sitting here, ESG1 here. I have an Edge Services Gateway and this will be a 1 over here as well. Now what's going to end up happening is this guy right here is going to be connected to the UDLR. So I'm going to have a UDLR. I'm going to put this guy between both of them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create additional logical switches. I'm going to create a logical switch that's going to connect this guy here, and his name will be DC1 Transit. I'm going to put in here trans here, and that's going to be this guy. And he will get the 12 address, the 12.0 subnet. I'm going to do the same thing here. This guy right here will be DC2-trans, and that's this guy, and this will be the 13.0 subnet. Okay, and this is we're going to run on this. We're going to run OSPF on all of our connections. On the UDLR, we're going to make sure that the redistribution is happening for logical switch 10,000 and 10,001. This is going to be how we set this up and this is going to allow us to route externally. So we're going to have to make sure that OSPF is running between edge ESG1 and the UDLR, and ESG1 and DC2 in the UDLR, and go from there. That is going to be what we need to go ahead and set up. This is going to take us a little bit to get squared away, so let's go ahead and dive into it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to configure the logical switches that we're going to connect everything together with. On here I'm going to go ahead and create add, and the name I'm going to give this is going to be DC1-transit. I already created this stuff so I know it works. I'm going to associate this to the universal transport zone. Click on add, and I'm going to add this here as well. This is going to be DC2-transit associated to the universal transport zone. Universal transport zone will allow me to traverse both of my connections. Now that I have that, I'm going to jump back over here to NSX edges, and on the primary guy I'm going to first start on my universal logical switches, or UDLRs, excuse me. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to go to the configure tab and then interfaces, and I'm going to add an interface. The first interface that I'm going to add here is going to be DC1-transit. This is going to be an uplink on the UDLR, and I'm going to click on connected to, and I'm going to say to DC1-transit. Click on OK. The IP address here will be 172.29.12.2, since this is a UDLR and then it's going to be a 24-bit mask. Click on add, and there we go. So that's going to go ahead and add that in. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another one. It's running a little bit slow. Okay, the job is now done. I'm going to come over here. This is going to be DC2-transit. It's going to be an uplink connected to the DC2-transit logical switch. I'm going to add. Come over here. This is going to be 172.29.13.2/24. Click on add. Alright, so once that's done, we'll be in good shape there. Give that a minute to do its thing. So right now I've created my logical switches, and on the UDLR I have connected my universal logical switches for DC1 and DC2-transit accordingly. I'm going to back this stuff up a little bit, and let me go here and edit actions, rename. It's bothering me that it's a U. I meant to say UDLR1. There, we'll go ahead and click on OK. That'll take a second to update. I may have to pause. And there we go. So I'll be right back. I'm going to pause for this. Alright, now that that's been updated, what I'm going to go do is, that is configured on the UDLR, so I'm going to have to go over here to the ESG. This is the Data Center 1 ESG. I'm going to go to configure and the interfaces. And on one of these available interfaces, I'm going to go ahead and edit. And this is going to be an internal interface. I'm going to call this DC, give that a second to do its thing, DC1-transit. Connect it to, and I'm going to connect this to the DC1-transit logical switch. Click on OK. And then I'm going to add an interface IP address. The IP address here will be 172.29.12.1/24. Click on save, and we're going to let that do its thing. So that'll take just a moment to push the config down to that guy, and we'll be squared away there. Alright, so now that that's been pushed, I'm going to come back here one level, and I'm going to switch to the secondary. So now I'm on secondary. I'm going to go to the edge. I'm going to go to configure, interfaces, and I'm going to click on 2, and I'm going to edit. This one here is going to be, you guessed it, DC2-transit. The internal connection, I'm going to bump this to be DC2-transit for the logical switch. Click OK. The IP address here will be 172.29.13.1/24. Click on save, and there we go. So we'll give that a minute to do its thing. I'm actually going to go ahead and pull up my Edge Services Gateway here. And this is my DC2 ESG. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a show interfaces and hit the enter key. If I come down here to VNIC 2, we can see VNIC 2 has the IP address of 172.29.13.1. So if I was to ping 172.29.13.2, I should be able to ping the UDLR, which I can. So now that I can do that, that means I should be able to set up some connectivity. Now I'm going to go back to my UDLR. Give that a second here to do its thing. I'm going to go back to the UDLR on the primary, and I'm going to pull up the UDLR, and I'm going to go over here to the routing tab, and I am going to set up OSPF between them. So I'm going to go ahead and in the dynamic routing configuration, I'm going to click on edit, and I'm going to choose a custom router ID once that pulls up. And the custom router ID that I'm going to put in here is going to be 1.1.1.1.4. Click on save. I'm going to publish that config. That'll take a couple seconds to push. And then I'm going to come down to OSPF. And then on OSPF, I'm going to edit this guy. I'm going to say the interface that I'm going to tie this guy to. I have two of them. I'm going to say DC1 transit. I'm going to enable. The protocol address will be 172.29.12. And I'm going to say 254, just so that it's an IP address in my range. I'm going to click on save. I'm also going to add and this is going to be the protocol address for that particular configuration. I'm going to go ahead and just publish that real quick because it's right there. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to have to do is right now I only have one area, which is going to be area 51. So I'm going to add some interfaces to this area. The first interface that I'm going to add is going to be DC1 transit, area 51. I'm going to ignore the interface MTU settings, click on add. I'm going to add another one, and this is going to be DC2 transit. And click on add, and those two are now connected, so I have two different egress points. I'm going to click on publish. Now it says for logical router only one OSPF uplink interface is supported. So this is kind of a interesting scenario where you want to have connections to both of your upstream Edge Services gateways from your UDLR, but in this case here it won't let you do that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to delete DC2 from that configuration, and there's not much I can do about it. I'm going to go ahead and publish that config, and let me go ahead and close that out. A DC1 transit is going to be the only one I'll have. Even though I want high availability, it's not going to let me do what it is that I want to do. So I'm going to go down to route redistribution and make sure OSPF is permitted, and it is. So I'm going to come over here. That was my Edge service. My UDLR is now configured. If I make sure that everything's working, if I come over to my DC2 switch and I do a show IP route, you're going to see that I'm still learning stuff in, right? And I have my 13 network going here, and I have my 101 network going, but I don't have any of the other connections. So what this basically means is that because of the fact that the OSPF configuration doesn't allow me to have more than one uplink, I have a scenario where I'm going to be polarizing traffic from DC2, will ride the universal logical switch to DC1, and then ride out to the rest of the network. So if I was to pull up my router, my CSR1000V, and I do a show IP route, you're going to see the subnets come across. Well, actually, I take that back. They're not. I think I missed a step here. I went to the UDLR and got them configured. I need to come over here to the ESG and do the routing here as well. So I'm going to go to the routing tab. This guy's already good to go. OSPF. I'm going to add this as a internal interface. This will be to DC1 transit because that's all that's supported. This will be area 51. I'm going to ignore that, click on add, and then I'm going to publish. So that's going to be how that's going to roll out. And so once that's done, we'll be able to move forward with our configuration. Now he is squared away. I'm going to go ahead and pull this back up, hit the up arrow, and so we should start seeing, and which we are. We're seeing the 172.29.12 network come through, then 13, 100, and 101. But if I look at my Edge Services Gateway over here, and I look at my routing table, I'm seeing some of this stuff come across. I can reach 172.29.12 that way, and I would have to leave out my local connection. So essentially, it's still going to work, but it's ideally not the way that I would want it to work. So that is basically how you would provide the connectivity outbound. So now if I go back over here to my hosts and clusters, and I pull up, let's say DC2 LVM2. Let's go ahead and log in here. Give that a second to catch up. It's running a little bit slow. I might actually have to close everything out and retry. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ping quad 8. See if I can ping that. Destination host unreachable. So on the UDLR, if I come in here and I do a ping to 172.29.101.1, I can ping my default gateway, and I can even ping some other device on some other subnet. But if I wanted to ping 10.255.1.1, it's telling me that it's unreachable, meaning that the connectivity isn't quite set up the way that it needs to be. So it's kind of a tricky situation to be in, and I can't deploy another UDLR because that's not how it works in this type of a scenario. It's the scenario where this isn't necessarily going to be used for providing access to the internet necessarily. This will be one of those situations where you're trying to do cross vCenter communication in different data centers inside the same logical switch. So there's a couple of different, this is one of the issues you run into. It might be easier to use layer 2 VPN or IPsec VPN for the communication, but alright, so I went back to the UDLR just to make sure that I hadn't overlooked anything, and one of the things that I did is I added DC2 transit to it and even bumped up the cost, saying, hey, you know, I'll make DC1 transit the proper egress, and it still won't let me do it. So I'm just going to go ahead and revert the changes. So this is where another scenario would have to come into play with some other routing solution, like you'd have to set a BGP to it and do that type of stuff. So I haven't actually tested that out yet. I'm going to test that out before the next video. But as you can see, the operation does still work to a certain extent. So if I was to come over here to LVM1 and log into him, give that a couple seconds to log in, and if I was to try to ping Google, that works. So from DC1 outbound it works, but unfortunately from DC1 outbound, or from DC2, it does not. So we have a little bit of a problem there. So it's one of those things where you'd have to be careful in how you're doing stuff. So I'm going to leave, I'm not done with this thing, so it's technically not working 100% for both data centers across the UDLR and with the connections that we have set up. But that's not the end of the testing. So I'm going to, in the following video, I'm going to take a look at some other things and walk you through how to fix some of these issues with some other solutions. So just be confident. I'm not leaving you guys hanging. I'll catch you guys in the next video.